Look at your wallet or your banking app right now. You see numbers on a screen or pieces of printed paper. You trade these imaginary points for food, shelter, and security. But to your ancient ancestors, this entire system would seem like absolute madness. For millions of years, there was no money, no price tags, and no commerce. If you wanted something, you either found it, made it, or took it by force. So how did a species of hunter-gatherers invent the ultimate shared hallucination called currency? The answer lies not in economics, but in deep evolutionary psychology. Long before the first coin was minted, humans relied on a system of brutal simplicity. We call it the barter system, but the reality was far more chaotic. Imagine you just spent 3 days tracking and killing a deer. You have excess meat that will rot in a matter of days. You want a new flint knife, but the toolmaker only wants mammoth fur. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants, and it is a nightmare. If the person holding what you need does not want what you have, you starve. In small, close-knit tribes of 50 people, this wasn't a huge problem. Early humans didn't actually barter with their friends and family. They operated on a system of unspoken social debt. If I give you a piece of my hunt today, you owe me a favor tomorrow. Our brains literally evolved to track these favors, calculating who was generous and who was a freeloader. Gossip was the first credit score. But as populations grew, everything broke down. You cannot track social debts with strangers from a tribe 50 miles away. You cannot trust a hunter you have never met to repay a favor next winter. We needed something physical, something that held memory outside of our brains. We needed an object that said I have contributed to the group, and I am owed. This is the exact moment money was born. It wasn't gold, and it wasn't silver. It was obsidian, animal teeth, and rare seashells. Over 100,000 years ago, humans began stringing shells into necklaces. To a purely logical animal, this makes zero sense. You cannot eat a shell, and you cannot use it to kill a mammoth. But these shells possessed a magical trinity of traits that would define all future currency. They were durable, they were portable, and most importantly, they were hard to fake. You had to travel to the coast, risk your life in the waves, and spend hours polishing them. The shell represented stored human energy and time. When you gave a stranger a necklace of shells, you were handing them frozen labor. Suddenly, humans could trade with people they did not know and did not trust. You didn't need to trust the stranger, you just needed to trust the shell. This single psychological leap changed the trajectory of our species forever. It allowed humans to cooperate in numbers no other animal could achieve. Trade networks exploded across continents, connecting tribes separated by thousands of miles. Flint from modern-day Turkey was found hundreds of miles away in the Levant. People were trading ideas, technology, and genes along with these primitive currencies. Trade also became the ultimate alternative to violence. Before currency, if two tribes met, the default interaction was often bloodshed. But if the other tribe had something you desperately wanted, killing them became bad business. A dead man cannot bring you exotic spices, rare stones, or warm furs next season. Currency gave us a reason to keep our enemies alive. But the system was about to face its greatest crisis. Around 12,000 years ago, humans invented farming. For the first time in history, we were producing massive, permanent surpluses of food. Hunter-gatherers moved constantly, carrying only what they needed. Farmers built permanent settlements and hoarded literal tons of grain. Shells and bone necklaces were no longer enough to manage this immense wealth. The Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia came up with a brilliant, brutal solution. They turned food itself into the currency. A specific measure of barley, known as a selah, became the standard unit of value. Workers were paid in barley, debts were calculated in barley, and taxes were collected in barley. But dragging bags of grain around the desert was exhausting and inefficient. So they invented the most powerful technology of the ancient world. They invented accounting. Priests in giant temples would take your grain and hand you a clay tablet. That tablet was an IOU, a written promise that the temple owed you a certain amount of wealth. You could then trade that clay tablet to someone else. This was the birth of credit, paper money, and the banking system, thousands of years before Wall Street. It was an astonishing act of collective imagination. The value was no longer in the object itself, but in the trust placed in the institution. But institutions can burn down, and clay tablets can be smashed. As empires grew, kings needed a currency that was indestructible and universally desired. They turned their eyes to the earth, looking for something eternal. They found metal. Copper and bronze were useful for weapons, but they oxidized and degraded. Iron was too common and rusted away in the rain. But there was one metal that defied the laws of nature. It did not rust, it did not tarnish, and it melted beautifully in the fire. Gold. Gold has no practical use to an ancient human trying to survive. It is too soft to make a sword and too heavy to make armor. Yet, its sheer chemical uselessness is exactly what made it the perfect money. Because it couldn't be consumed or destroyed, every piece of gold ever mined stayed in circulation. The Egyptians believed gold was the flesh of the gods. The Lydians in ancient Turkey took it a step further. Around 600 BC, they stamped the king's face into small lumps of electrum, a mix of gold and silver. This was the world's first true coin. The stamp guaranteed the weight and purity, saving merchants from weighing the metal at every transaction. Money was no longer just an object, it was a political weapon. When a Roman soldier bought wine in Gaul with a silver denarius, he was spreading the emperor's authority. The face on the coin reminded everyone who controlled the world. We are still playing the exact same game today. Your green paper and digital bank balances are just the modern versions of cowrie shells and clay tablets. They have no intrinsic value. They only work because 8 billion people wake up every morning and agree to believe in the same hallucination. Money is the most successful story ever told. It is the invisible thread that binds human history. And it all started with a caveman trading a shiny rock to a stranger in the dark.